Good evening, everyone. I'm Nancy Seligson. I'm the town supervisor for the Town of Mamaroneck, and I want to thank you for joining us tonight. We have with us Kevin Clarke, who is a wildlife biologist with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. He's had that job for 12 years. He has made numerous presentations on the coyote issue in our state because it is a statewide problem. But we were prompted to action and asked him to join us because we have gotten lots of calls, emails, and complaints about the coyote situation in our community. And I do not control biodiversity as much as I'd love to, but I recognize that people are scared and that it is frightening to see a wild animal in our community. So our response has been that there is no hunting allowed in Westchester County except with a bow and arrow. I do not believe that there is any hunting season in the town of Mamaroneck or village of Larchmont or New Rochelle for that matter. And so some of the automatic responses that people have, will just trap it or just kill it or just get rid of it, are not really so simple or so easy when you're in such a developed community as ours. But we have been advising people that if the animals truly seems threatening, please call the police. And the police will come and assess the situation. But we are looking forward to having Kevin tell us a little bit about what the situation is, how best to respond to it. We also, I just want to announce, have Carol Casaza Herman with us, who's the Village of Larchmont trustee. And we have the manager of the city of New Rochelle with us, Chuck Strome, who actually brought his police report of all the coyote sightings in New Rochelle, because of course coyotes don't obey municipal boundaries. He's tried to tell them go to Mamaroneck, we've told them go to New Rochelle, but they're all over. So Kevin, thank you so much for coming, because you came from Albany, right?
I came from New Paltz.
Okay, that's still pretty far.
So I'm glad that people are excited that I'm here. It's always interesting to see people's reactions when I'm done speaking. I think they don't always get the answers that they're hoping for. Wildlife conflicts with people, there's never any really easy solutions. Some of the things that I hear and I think about talking about before I speak, I hope I cover them all by the time I'm done speaking, but hopefully you guys will ask some questions and prompt some information from me, and that might spur my memory as far as things that I want to say. Actually, let's start off talking about the history of coyotes in New York. I kind of have a format here that I want to try to stay on track with, and we'll see if that works tonight. So the history of coyotes in New York is that they're a newcomer on our landscape. They're a newcomer in New York, they're a newcomer in Westchester. They came into New York probably in the early 1900s. They took a couple of routes to get here. They came from the west. They came north of the Great Lakes, they came south of the Great Lakes, and then they kind of filtered their way down south to the Westchester area. And now they're pretty firmly established everywhere in New York. And that includes the boroughs in New York City, it includes Long Island, Nassau County at the very least, and I am pretty sure that they've made their way out to Suffolk County as well. So the reality is coyotes are established in New York. They're here to stay. I don't think there's anything that we can ever do to get rid of them. Farmers and ranchers out west where they kill sheep, they've been trying to get rid of coyotes for probably a century now. They've gone to the extreme of every time they kill a coyote, and my wife and I saw this when we were turkey hunting out west, I think it was in Montana, where when they kill a coyote, they actually hang it on their fence, hoping that the other coyotes won't come around. How well that works, I'm not sure it does, and I'm not going to tell anybody to kill a coyote and hang it on a fence in their yard. Let's not get into that. But like I said, coyotes are here, they're here to stay. There's a lot of speculation about what these animals are, but the reality is what we have here are what we call eastern coyotes. They're slightly different than their western counterpart. They're a little bit larger, not a whole lot, but a little bit larger. They average about 35 pounds. They do take advantage of a little bit larger prey species here. They feed on deer in New York, but they are primarily mousers. That's what they do, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. But as far as their populations in New York, like I said, they're everywhere here. They are protected by law, so their status in New York is as a small game species. And as a small game species under protection by law, that means that they have an open season and they have a closed season. So the open season for coyotes, whether it's hunting or trapping, both of those seasons are open right now. In New York State, hunting season for coyotes opens October 1st, trapping season opens for coyotes on October 25th, and we're in that point right now, but the reality is you guys live in Westchester. And I'll ask one question, how many people here hunt or trap coyotes in Westchester? So we got one hand that goes up. But the reality is there's not a lot of people here that hunt and trap coyotes. So I was asked a few questions before I got up here, and one of those questions is, you know, if they've been here for a couple of decades, like you say, how come now we see them more often than we used to? You know, and I have my hypotheses about these, you know, I have my thoughts. And I think one of those things is, you know, the way they got down here through upstate New York down into southern New York was through an area where people do actively hunt and trap, and they have for a long time. And coyotes, when they come through those areas, you know, they're a little more threatened than they are down here in Westchester. And it probably took some time, and it probably took a couple of coyote generations to get to the point where they really got comfortable being around people. And dogs and coyotes are canids, and you can think of them as dogs. They can get very comfortable around people. Dogs are easily domesticated. Coyotes can probably be domesticated if we really wanted to, and I'm not going to suggest that. We see it with deer when you feed them constantly. They can become domesticated. Wild turkeys can become domesticated. So what happens is over time and over generations, they've just gotten to the point where they realize that people are no threat to them. And for a long time, DEC has been telling people, you know, make yourself big and loud and wave your arms and yell at them, and that'll make them afraid of you. And I don't think that's the case anymore, quite honestly. And I'm sure there's people that still, you know, give that sentiment, that's what you should do, but I've gotten past that point. I've gotten to the point now where I'm saying, hey, let's, you know, actively harass that animal. But I'm gonna get to that a little bit more later. So the reality is, there is hunting in Westchester. For deer, as you were told, it's bow only, but for small game, you can use a shotgun. So other implements are allowed for hunting in Westchester. But the reality is, hunting in Westchester and anywhere across New York State is only allowed where a landowner permits it to occur. And even in that case, hunting is only allowed or it's regulated by ordinances created by the state that dictate how close you can be to a building to discharge either a bow or a firearm. And a firearm in New York State, it's 500 feet, and that's from an occupied dwelling, that's a school, that's a church, that's a playground, that's a farm building that's in use, okay? And for a bow, it's 150 feet. For a crossbow, it's 250 feet. So there are regulations that dictate what you can do even in areas that you have permission to hunt or trap. So even though you can hunt small game coyotes in Westchester, and you can use a firearm to hunt coyotes in Westchester, the reality is when you look at a map of Westchester and you look at a map of southern Westchester, where we are today, you look at a Delorme, there's a lot of orange on that map. And that orange means streets, communities, and you look and you say, hey, there's no place I can discharge. The other factor that's involved is there are local ordinances that go above and beyond our state laws and regulations that say, hey, even within the village limits, if you can hunt, we're not going to let you discharge a firearm anyway. It's just not safe. And I would agree with that. I don't think anybody should be discharging a firearm here in Larchmont. You know, I don't think going out and shooting coyotes is going to be the solution here. But either way, let me talk a little bit about, I'm going to answer questions at the end, otherwise I get distracted. Once I get sidetracked, that's it, and then I'll never get out what I want to say. So I'll talk a little bit about the life history of coyotes, and it pertains directly to some of the conflicts that we see. So coyotes right now are kind of in that juvenile dispersal period. Their breeding period, their pair bonding period, that's usually in the winter. And then their breeding period is late winter. Pups are born early spring, and then the denning period goes probably through August. Then the juveniles and the family units leave those den sites. Those juveniles in the fall start dispersing to new areas. So that's the point we're at now. So there was a phone call recently that I got from is it Village of Larchmont, Town of Mamaroneck?
Yes.
Okay, so I got a phone call saying a pet was killed, a dog was killed, and that's most commonly what we see. Although we get reports about cats, but it's very difficult to confirm them because there are a lot of reasons cats die when they're let outside on the landscape. But we got a phone call about a dog that was killed in this time of year. So when I first started doing this 12 years ago, we didn't hear about a lot of dogs being killed in the fall. It was usually during that denning period, that pup rearing period, when that male is out there and he is highly territorial. So he is out, his one job during that time of year is to protect that family. And talking with my buddies at USDA, some biologists there, talking to other biologists that are very knowledgeable around the state about coyotes, those males, they get so territorial during that time of year, and they're looking at those other canids as invaders in their territory. And we know wolves kill coyotes, coyotes kill foxes, coyotes kill dogs. It doesn't seem to be all coyotes, because I think if all coyotes acted the same way, I think there would be a lot more dogs killed every year. I get a handful of reports every year. Most of them are from Westchester. I think other parts of my region, I just don't hear about it. I think people take care of that problem themselves, and it just goes away, and I never ever hear about it. But the reality is, when I started doing this, the reports that we used to get were during that pup rearing period. So it was May, it was June, and every May that rolled around, I'd get excited about turkey season, and then I'd get a little depressed about the fact that I know I'm going to get that phone call sooner or later. And I'm going to have to talk to somebody that's really upset because their pet just died. And I have to ask them questions, and I know they're not in the mindset where they want to answer those questions. And it's a terrible time of year for me to have to deal with these conflicts. But we try to resolve these conflicts, and we have ways of doing that, and we try to educate people. But what we've seen over the years that I've been here is now we're seeing dogs that are killed in the fall. So again, you know, I have my own hypotheses about why this is occurring. Period. We have juveniles that are leaving the family unit, so now they're no longer under parental control. They're essentially teenagers that are going out on their own, and we all teenagers act. They're not always the most well-behaved kids on the landscape. So now they're going out and trying to establish their own territories. They're going out to areas that are not necessarily occupied, okay? They're trying to establish a home range, and all of a sudden here in this new territory that they're trying to establish, hey, here's another canid. And we all know what happens. Sometimes that dog gets killed. Sometimes it doesn't. Like I said, not all coyotes exhibit this behavior. Oh no. Dead battery? Yeah. So like I said, not all coyotes seem to exhibit this behavior. I did swan research for 2 years when I first came to DEC back in 2004. And swans had a really bad reputation. Swans are nasty, they're mean, right? There was even a report, I read an article that a swan killed a kayaker. Just, you know, tipped the kayak over and got on top of him, beat him with his wings. I've seen male swans do it to other swans. They can be pretty territorial, they can get pretty nasty, and sometimes it's a pretty violent scene. But what I found doing that research for 2 years is not all swans act that way. It was actually a small percentage of the males that I studied that acted that way. And I think it's the same thing with coyotes. Although I know they're territorial, I know they don't like other dogs in their territory, it's just we don't get that many reports that makes me think that every male coyote in every family unit across the state is a dog killer. But we know it happens, and we know that it's 2 times a year, spring and fall. Or at least those are the times when it seems to be a little more concentrated. Doesn't just happen in Westchester, happens all across the region. I manage 7 counties. It happens all across the state. So now we can talk about, well, what can we do to resolve these conflicts? Well, there's DEC's role, and then there's the public's role. So DEC has kind of our standard operating procedures and how we deal with these conflicts. And there's a couple of things that we do. One is we educate the public on how to live with these animals on the landscape, and that's primarily my role. And in most cases, that's the best solution, because I truly believe that if we change our behavior just a little bit, it'll resolve some of these conflicts. The other thing that DEC has the ability to do is DEC has the ability to issue permits. Now, I get a lot of phone calls about coyotes, and I know what the one solution is that everybody wants. And I'll say it right now, I don't even need anybody to tell me. What they hope is that DEC is going to come down, we're going to set traps, we're going to trap coyotes, and we're going to move them to the sanctuary, which I actually want to make a TV show about. Wherever the sanctuary is, I've yet to find it. So here's the reality. Like I said, coyotes are everywhere in the state. The last thing we want to do is start moving them around the state. The last thing that DEC wants to do is take a species that people consider a threat to humans and move it somewhere else where it's going to be a threat to humans. Although I'll give you my opinion in a little bit whether I think they're a threat to human or not. But the reality is there's just no place to move these animals. There's no place that isn't occupied if the habitat is good for these animals. These animals are what we call generalists, getting back to life history a little bit. So like I said, coyotes have the reputation of being a predator. They are primarily mousers. That's what they do. There's a lot of images on the internet. You see that coyote up on its hind legs, and it's in a pounce position. What it's doing is it's pouncing on a mouse. Same thing you'll see foxes do. Red foxes do this a lot. I've watched gray foxes do it. It's pretty neat. They're really good at it. They are really good mousers. I am sure they kill voles. I am sure they kill moles. But diet studies that we've done show that they primarily kill mice. They also kill rabbits. We get a lot of phone calls, hey, we have coyotes in the area. There's no more rabbits left. I don't know of a single predator that comes into an area and eliminates a prey base, though. Just doesn't happen. You can ask my father-in-law. He's got chipmunks. He wishes that some predator would come in and get rid of every chipmunk he has in his backyard. He's got, probably barred owls in the area. He's got red foxes in the area. He's got coyotes in the area. And he has probably 100 chipmunks per, acre on his property. So there's no predator out there that's going to come and eliminate a prey base. There's different reasons why certain times of the year we see things more often than other times of the year. With rabbits, who knows why that is? We probably see them more like coyotes during the breeding season. And so that breeding season is when we see coyotes a lot. That May, June time of year, if you think about it, like I said, their number one responsibility is to take care of the family. And one of the things that they have to do to take care of that family is they have to feed them. So what they're doing is they're out on the landscape 24/7 trying to get food for that family unit. So you'll see the male, you'll see the female, both parents will go out and collect food for them. I think one of them stays home and takes care of the pups while the other one's out hunting. That's what I would do. It sounds like that's the best scenario. Everything that I've looked up says that's what they do. One's out looking for food, the other one's home with the family. But we see them all the time. Same thing with red foxes. I get calls about them all the time. During that pup rearing period or that kit rearing period for foxes, they are out on the landscape constantly. Young have a super high energetic demand. Anybody who has kids here, it's amazing the metabolism they have when they're growing up. They can eat everything and anything, and they don't put on weight. It's amazing. And then you get to my age, and that all changes. But in reality that's why they're seen more often that time of the year. So we kind of have to think about these things when we are figuring out how to live with these animals on the landscape. But getting back to what DEC's role is with these conflicts, is we can issue permits. Aside from me going out and reaching out to the public and trying to educate, we can issue permits, but we don't move them. It's a lethal removal when we issue a permit. And I know that's not something that people like to hear, but that's the reality. It's a lethal permit. So that permit entitles either the homeowner to do it themselves, or to hire somebody, or maybe somebody will volunteer. It's rare that you're going to find somebody to volunteer down here to come in and trap a coyote for you. The entities that do, they charge money to do it, whether it's private entities. There's different ones around. There's Westchester Wildlife Services. I know a couple other guys. You can look them up in the yellow pages. You can look them up on the internet. There's a couple of different organizations, or entities, I should say, that do this work, including USDA. They have what's called Wildlife Services, where you can hire them to do it, but the reality is they all charge money. And that's something that nobody wants to hear. But that's the reality of it. If you don't have the ability to set traps yourself, or you don't have the fortitude or the gut to go out and set traps yourself, and I'm sure most people here don't, you would have to hire somebody or get somebody to do that for you. So what happens is, sometimes down in these more urban areas, municipalities get involved. And as you can see, the municipality was nice enough to put this meeting together. They were nice enough to call me and get me down here, try to educate folks. But what happens down here, often we've seen it in Greenberg, we've seen it in Rye, we've seen it in other communities, they will take on that responsibility. And they somehow get a pot of money together and they say, hey, this is at the point where we feel like we need to do something, and a permit is issued to the community. And then they take on that responsibility of hiring a trapper, whoever it is, and then the trapper takes on that role of dealing with it, which, like I said, is lethal removal. Just because, like I said earlier, there is no place to remove them to. They're territorial animals. You're not going to take one from Westchester and move it up into the Adirondacks. They can't do that anyway. Their permits kind of restrict them. Not kind of, their permits restrict them. They can't even move them outside the county that they're trapped in. So if they're trapped in Westchester County, they have to be released in Westchester County. But coyotes, we don't want them moving around Westchester County at all. If that animal is deemed to be a threat to human safety, I don't even want them moving it up to the Adirondacks. There's a ton of people up in the Adirondacks. They're out there hiking, they're out there walking their dogs, they're doing all sorts of things, even in the high peaks areas. If it's deemed a threat to human safety, I don't want them moved around the state. If it's a dog killer, which is the primary issue, that's the reason I'm here, that's the real issue with coyotes, is they kill dogs. I don't want them being moved to anywhere else in the state. I don't want to take a coyote that we know has killed a dog and move it somewhere else in the state where, guess what? It's probably going to kill a dog. So that seems to be the big issue with coyotes, though, is killing dogs. And like I said, DEC's role can be to educate, to issue a permit. But my other role, as far as education, is to kind of try to help people find ways to live with coyotes. So, like I said, in the past, we used to say, hey, raise your arms, wave your arms, make yourself look big, sound loud, you know, kind of put a little bit of fear into them. Is there any place in Westchester that you can go where at some point during the day you don't hear somebody yelling, or you don't hear a car horn, or you don't hear things being banged around, banged together? They say bang pots and pans. These coyotes that live in Westchester, they've heard it all. They have. It's true. They hear people yelling, they hear people arguing, they hear things all the time. They see people, they don't care. They've seen people wave their arms, they don't care. So the one thing about coyotes that I've learned doing this for 12 years is they are super curious. What a coyote's gonna do, and we've noticed black bears do this too, but coyotes seem to do it more than other animals, is when you yell and wave your arms, they're gonna turn, they're gonna look at you, and they're gonna watch you. And a white-tailed deer will do the same thing too. I've encountered, you encounter a buck in the woods and you think, oh, it sees a human, it's just gonna run. Well, there's that fight or flight distance. And it's gonna get in a safe distance and it's gonna stop and it's gonna turn around and it's gonna look. And it's gonna assess the situation, as we say. And it's gonna try to make a decision. And it's gonna either decide that you're a threat or you're not a threat. And if you stand there and you wave your arms and you yell and you're loud, it's going to get outside of that comfort zone and it's going to sit there and it's going to look at you. And if you just stand there and wave your arms and you yell, at some point it's going to figure out they're not a threat. And that's the reality, is we're not a threat. Like I said, nobody's setting traps around here. You have ordinances that regulate discharge of a firearm. Hunting seasons are only open during certain times of year, and nobody's hunting coyotes in this part of Westchester, maybe a little further north, but not down here. And in generations, and a generation for a coyote is about 2 years, they've determined that we're not a threat. So I've actually taken it a step further. Environmental conservation law says that it is illegal to take outside of an open season. Take includes harass, worry, chase. So for a long time, I was afraid to tell people anything other than, hey, look big, yell, wave your arms, those types of things, because anything else can be considered harassment. I've gotten to the point now in my career where I'm saying, hey, harass it. I don't think there's an environmental conservation police officer in the county that's gonna write you a ticket for throwing a rock at a coyote that's in your backyard, especially if you have a small dog that uses that backyard. So I'm telling people, harass that coyote. The Humane Society is telling people, harass that coyote. Biologists all over the country are saying, harass that coyote. There's a PhD, I forget if he's out of Chicago or maybe he's in California now, that looked at this hazing on a community-wide level. And his interpretation is hazing works. The problem is it's hard to get a community as a whole to do it. There's a lot of people that live in Westchester. There's a lot of people that live in Larchmont, that live in New Rochelle, that live in Chappaqua. And it's hard to get everybody on the same page. And an example of that is look around the room. How many people are here versus how many people live in Larchmont? I'm glad that they televised this meeting because I think that's a good way to get the information out there. And they've televised the meeting in Greenberg, and they televised my meeting in Rye, and they televised my meeting from Pleasantville. And I've done radio shows and I've done television shows, but I still don't think enough people are getting the information. We have information all over our website. But the reality is, for hazing to work, everybody has to be involved and everybody has to do it. And that's an extremely difficult thing to achieve. But I've gotten to the point where I say, hey, throw rocks at it, throw sticks at it, spray it with your hose if it gets close enough. I'm not going to tell you to shoot it with your pellet gun. I'm sure there's ordinances that regulate that. I'm not sure shooting it with a pellet gun would even make that thing flinch. But I'm telling you, do things that kind of make that coyote see you as some kind of threat. I had a black bear that got into my garage. I chased him for about a quarter of a mile. He never came back. Every time he stopped and turned around, there I was. I'm not going to tell you to put yourself in harm's way. I'm not telling you to chase coyotes around the neighborhood. I'm not telling you to chase black bears. But I'm saying when they feel threatened, it changes their behavior. Coyotes are canids. Canids are trainable. That's why we have Canis domesticus, right? Because we've trained them over generations, over a lifetime. Okay? I think coyotes can be trained to some degree the same way. I think we have to let them know that, hey, you shouldn't feel comfortable around people. I would love to be able to tell you to use dog spray, but the reality is dog sprays are considered a pesticide. They're only legal for use on your own property. So I can't tell you when you're walking your dog in the park, carry a can of pepper spray, but I guarantee if you hit a coyote in the face with pepper spray, it's going to stop it in its tracks. They're labeled for use with dogs. They're not labeled for use with wildlife. Bear spray is labeled for use with bears, not labeled for use with coyotes. Semantics, maybe, but that's the reality of it. DEC regulates pesticide use as well. So I can't sit here and tell you to do that, but I'm sure it would be effective. I would love to see some of those ordinances, laws changed, regulations. I'd love to see people be able to use pepper spray on a coyote. I would love to give you guys a way to protect your dog when you're walking it. And so let's talk about that for a moment, when you're walking a dog. I get a lot of reports every year, and somebody in my office came up today and they said their sister-in-law was almost attacked by a coyote because it was stalking them, followed them home while she was walking her dog on a leash. Here's the reality. That coyote's not focused on you. We're not on the menu for coyotes. It doesn't care about you. What it cares about is that little dog that you're walking on a leash. And our reports indicate that dogs that are in danger are small dogs, typically under 15 pounds. Coyotes weigh about 35, like I said. They don't want to get into it with a big dog. Their goal is to stay alive to protect the family. Their goal is not to get into it with a 75-pound lab where there's a chance they're not going to make it out of that fight. But when they see a 15 or a 10-pounder, like the one up in Woodstock, was an 8-pound dog, it's not going to think twice about that. And so here's the reality. When you're walking a dog, and a coyote sees you walking that little 5-pound, 10-pound, even 25-pound, even bigger dogs, like I said, they're curious. Maybe it's just curiosity, like when you're waving your arms and they stop and they turn and they stare and they watch and they're trying to assess whether you're a threat. So when they see you walking a larger dog, maybe it's curiosity. Hey, here's another canine in my territory. What's up with this other canine in my territory? I want to learn a little bit about it. Or maybe it's, hey, I'm going to kill that little dog. Here's the reality. The coyote gets fixated on that dog. So some of the things that we can do when we're walking our dog are A, walk that dog on a short leash. People love to walk their dogs on those long extendable leashes where they kind of get separated from the human that's walking them. Or even down here in Westchester, they walk them off leash. That's got to stop. I've had a lot of reports of coyotes coming up to dogs, even on leash. Walk that dog on a short leash, keep it close to you. When you're walking in your green spaces, I don't care, even if it's not a green space, keep that dog on a short leash. Step 2 is get that coyote's fixation off that dog and make him aware that you're there. My opinion is that they get so fixated on that dog that they're not even aware of your presence. It's like they're locked in some kind of trance, fixated on that dog. And so we have to take its attention off that dog and put it on us. I don't think that coyote's a threat to us. Like I said, they're 35 pounds. We're much bigger than that. We could be a threat to that coyote if we really wanted to be. But the reality is we have to take that coyote's attention off that dog and put it on us, make it aware that we are there. How? Clap your hands, yell. That's where I'm going to tell you to clap your hands and yell, wave your arms. Get that coyote's attention on you versus that dog. Because what'll happen is it's going to come up, it's going to approach that dog on leash. It'll follow you walking that dog. And again, I don't think that's a threat to the human. I think that's a threat that that coyote is exhibiting to that dog. And we've had reports where that coyote will follow that person right home, fixated on that dog the whole way. Blow an air horn, anything you can do to get that coyote's attention off that dog and onto you, make it aware of your presence. And then the other thing that I would do is I might consider carrying a stick, because if that coyote gets so brave to the point where it's going to approach that dog while you're walking it even on a short leash, maybe a little love tap will make him change his mind. I'm not sure. That's my hope. I haven't had a report yet where a coyote has come and taken a dog off of a short leash like that. I've had reports of coyotes that have taken dogs that are being walked by people that are not on leash. So the other time that we know coyotes go after dogs are in backyards. So the report from Woodstock was the other day, and this was disconcerting because I kind of take the responsibility for this because, like I said, my job is to educate, and I feel like when this happens, I'm not getting my job done because we had incidents earlier in New Paltz, and I tried to deal with that community to kind of change their behavior a little bit. And then I hear about this in Woodstock. Woodstock's not New Paltz, so obviously I didn't reach Woodstock. Woodstock is real animal friendly. They love them. They love to see animals in their backyard. But the reality is this guy had an 8-pound dog. He had a compost pile that he was continually throwing meat scraps onto. And he reported that the coyote was coming into his backyard regularly, probably daily, to get to those meat scraps. And what he did one night was he let the dog outside, unattended, after sunset, in a backyard where a coyote was visiting probably every night and coming in and taking food scraps. And then the other night he came in and he took the dog. Killed it. They don't consume dogs. Like I said, we did a diet study. They're not killing dogs and eating them, but we know they kill dogs out of territoriality. Days of the invisible fence, done. So apparently the incident that occurred in Larchmont, I think the woman had an invisible fence, right? Dog was let outside, has an invisible fence. Great for keeping the dog in the fenced backyard. Not good at all for keeping a coyote out of the backyard. There's nothing that's going to keep that coyote away from that dog when you let it outside and it's out there by itself and you know coyotes in their area. So there's a couple of things that have been suggested for people to do. There's a guy, Frank Vincenti, I think his name is, comes around, owns the Wild Dog Foundation. He gives this tip before you let your dog out in the backyard. Make noise, make your presence known. So if a coyote's back there, hopefully it'll leave. Then it'll be safe to let the dog out. But the worst thing you can do is just open the door and let the dog out and go back inside. Open the door, go outside, make your presence known. Then let the dog out. Stay outside with the dog. And I know nobody likes to hear these things, The last thing people want to do is change their behavior to accommodate a species that is new on the landscape. You know, when we talk about animals, it's always, well, we've moved into their territory. Well, the reality is coyotes kind of moved into ours because they weren't always here. Historically, they weren't always here. So they've kind of moved into our territory. Now I'm sitting here telling people, hey, you have to change your lifestyle to accommodate living with this animal on the landscape. But that's the reality. In my opinion, you can trap them, you can shoot them, but the reality is coyotes are here and they're here to stay. You trap them, you shoot them, they're going to be replaced by dispersing juveniles. What research has found is when you have a coyote that's acting badly and you remove it from the population, you get a little bit of respite. Sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes it's a year. They found sometimes it's even 2 or 3 years. But eventually another coyote comes back into that territory and something happens. So the last thing that I want to do as an agency representative is say, hey, we can issue the permit, kill that coyote, and everything's fine. Go ahead, let your dogs back outside, walk them off leash. That's not the reality. They're here and they got here from somewhere, and they're going to come back here from somewhere. So even though we deal with the ones that act badly and we might remove them from the population, at some point that area is going to get repopulated. And if we just go about our behavior as we were before when that happened, guess what? It's going to happen again. So we try to avoid that by modifying our behavior a little bit. And we hope that has an impact. There was something else that I wanted to talk about.
Feeding,
Yes. How did you know?
because that's what people do, they feed them.
So he's not a plant, I just want to say. I did not put him here. We did not work on this
I
beforehand.
live in the area.
So like I said, that dog that was killed up in Woodstock, that guy was unintentionally feeding. In New Paltz, earlier in the year, in the spring, we had 2 juvenile coyotes that came in. They set up shop in the community, actually in the village itself. And they were very used to people. They were approaching people. They were following people. And in my opinion, when you see a coyote that's exhibiting that kind of behavior, I think this is often the case. We had reports in Westchester, it was in Pleasantville. Guy called me from Pleasantville, or actually he spoke to me after the meeting. He said, I walked out my door and it was sitting on my deck. When a coyote starts exhibiting that kind of behavior, I think it's being fed. When I was doing my swan research, I went down to Greenwood Lake. Hey, here's a big nasty swan. We got to do something about it. I went there, I stood on the dock. The swan came up to me and started chewing on my feet. He's begging for food. The only difference is when a coyote begs for food, his mouth has teeth in it. So when he starts chewing on your feet, it's a whole different story than when a swan does it. Don't feed pets outside. Forget about the invisible fences. Walk dogs on a short leash. And remember what I said about coyotes being generalists. They will take advantage of a whole host of food sources. Even though they're mousers, even though they like rabbits, even though they kill squirrels, they will take advantage of any food source that's available to them in their territory. That includes birdseed, that includes fruits, that includes garbage, that includes pet food, that includes compost. I made a joke one time in Yonkers. I don't think it was very well received. I said if you throw a McDonald's hamburger on the ground, they'll probably eat the burger and the wrapper. But that's the reality, is they are generalists. They will take advantage of any food source that they can. Seeds and fruits, you know, they all need those things, part of their diet, different nutritional needs. They're not strictly carnivores like most people think, but even carnivores, if you ever watch your cat, what does your cat like to chew? Household plants, grasses. All animals have some nutritional requirements or some digestive requirement that causes them at some point, even if they're carnivores, to eat things other than meat. Coyotes are not strict carnivores. They benefit nutritionally from these other food sources. So we have to think about compost. We have to think about our garbage. We have to think about it with bears. We have to think about it with coyotes. We have to think about where we're feeding our pets. We have to think about what time of day we do these things. Most people think coyotes are nocturnal. That's not the case anymore. You know, that kind of nocturnal behavior is usually response to something. It's either when prey is available or when predators are not around. And that kind of sets up that nocturnal behavior. But the reality is with coyotes is they have nothing to fear down here. So nocturnal behavior goes out the window. I used to get an email every year from a woman up in Yorktown Heights, and she would send me a picture of a coyote wandering down the street in the middle of the day. They got nothing to fear. So we need to change our behavior a little bit. Now again, let me go back to DEC's response. So I did a little bit of outreach, I did a little bit of education, I told you what DEC's response can be. We can issue a permit, you can hire a trapper, you can do it yourself. You have to make sure you follow local ordinances. Okay? But there are times, there is a protocol that we follow that we say, this coyote has met the criteria, our recommendation is to get rid of that animal. So those times are when a coyote is exhibiting a threat to people or pets, or a coyote has attacked a person or a pet. Like I said, I don't think people are on the menu for coyotes. I don't think they're truly a threat to people, but in 2010, I'm gonna be completely transparent about this. The only known attack on a human being by a coyote in New York that I am aware of was in Rye, and it was in 2010. And that was the most difficult public meeting that I had to do, because I had to go down there and I had to stand in front of a room of about 300 people, and ABC was there, and NBC was there, and Fox was there. Not just the local news stations, not cable. It was all of these big media stations, and I had to sit there in front of that crowd and talk to them after, I think it was a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old, was just bitten by a coyote in somebody's backyard. I don't know why it happened. We issued a permit to remove that animal. I don't know if that animal was removed. You'll never know if the coyote that you trapped is the animal that caused the offense. That's one of the problems with this kind of response, is you just don't know. But I'm not going to tell you to not let your kids play in the backyard. But I will say that's the only incident that I know of. I truly do not believe they're a threat to people, but when this happened was in May. And the one thing that I know, being a deer biologist for a long, long time, is that deer drop fawns in May and June. Coyotes in New York kill fawns. They take a little bit bigger prey than their western counterparts, although the western counterparts kill large prey. They've been killing sheep for a long time, so it's not unheard of. They kill sheep in New York as well. But the one thing that we know studying coyotes in New York, and Robin Holovinsky out of ESF did a study on this, where she put collars on animals, GPS collars, and she tracked them, and she would actually find that they kill deer and they kill a lot of fawns. Primarily fawns or injured adults. So in May and June, they've got that search image. They're looking for that prey base that's about, say the table's the ground, about this high off the ground, sitting on the ground, laying on the ground. And then here you had the 2 kids, small children in the backyard, 1 or 2 coyotes. It was hard to tell because anybody who gave a report gave a different report. Coyote ran through the backyard, ran up, bit the kid on the shoulder, and took off. Is that a test bite? Is it like what biologists talk about with sharks? Oh, it's just a test bite from a great white. Oh, great. That's a mortal wound, probably. Is that a test bite from a coyote? I don't know. Was it trying to figure out if that kid was prey? I don't know. Was it a territorial thing? I don't know. I really don't know why that coyote did that. Was it a rabid animal? Maybe. You know, we had a couple of attacks. Okay, and I'm going to clarify. When I say attacks that I knew of by coyotes on people, I mean non-rabid animals. So in Greenberg and Hastings this year, you had a couple of people that were bitten by coyotes that were confirmed to be rabid. That behavior is different though. That behavior, and you see it in foxes as well, they become extremely aggressive. The behavior develops over about a 24-hour period. When they get to that point, they're going to bite anything that moves. They'll bite car tires, they'll bite bicycle tires, they'll chase you. A fox chased a man into his basement. They will bite anything that moves at that point. Rabies is a virus that doesn't live long. It is not super opportunistic, so it needs its host to be super opportunistic. So what rabies does is it makes the host be as aggressive as possible. Rabies, when it's in the environment, it burns out very quickly. So the one thing that the virus can do to ensure that that virus stays on the landscape is put its host in a situation where it's most likely to spread that virus from host to host. Rabies is spread through saliva, so the best thing that the virus can do is make that host bite everything that moves, and it gives that virus its best chance of persisting on the landscape. That behavior lasts for about 24 hours and that animal's dead. So even in that case, police responded, they shot it, they got it off the landscape. That's the best thing that they can do in that case. I'm not going to say, hey, wait it out, 24 hours, that thing will be dead. But it bit however many people in the meantime. So we say get rid of that animal. We say a coyote that's exhibiting a threat to humans or exhibiting a threat to pets, get rid of that animal, remove it from the population. Like I said earlier, I don't think every coyote on the landscape is a threat, even to small dogs, even though they're kind of hardwired that way. If they were, I think we'd see a lot more small dogs dying. But the reality is, when an animal meets that criteria, our recommendation is get it off the landscape. The problem is I manage coyotes in 7 counties. I wish I had the ability to help you guys out. I wish I could come down here and start setting traps. I'm not gonna lie to you. I've never set a trap in my life. I was hired to do this job for reasons other than setting traps to remove animals. I've never trapped an animal. I wouldn't know the first thing to do going out on the landscape. But luckily there are people down here that know how to do it. But our protocol says, hey, that is an animal that needs to be removed from the population. Like I said earlier, we're not going to move it somewhere else. It's a lethal removal. So there's our response, there's your response, modifying our behavior, trying to coexist with an animal that's made its way onto our landscape, that's going to be here for the rest of our lives. So I think we need to think a little bit about how we can live with these animals. I don't think we can ever let our guard down. I wish I could say, hey, it's going to be okay, we're going to deal with this situation, everything we find. That's not the case. Coyotes are something that you guys are going to have to think about for the rest of your lives here living in Westchester, or no matter where you move to in New York State. If you know you have a coyote in the area, you have to think twice every time you let that small dog out in the backyard, and try to follow some of the things that I told you. Hopefully we'll be able to resolve some of these conflicts. Hopefully we'll be able to avoid some of these conflicts. And now that I've talked at you for however long and maybe bored you to death, let's take some questions.
Yeah. Are there any towns that have lethal permits that if someone sees a coyote, they can go get it killed?
The only town right now that has what I call a blanket permit, I think Greenberg has one right now, and the town of Mount Pleasant has one right now, and I wish I had my database in front of me. But I believe those are the only 2 towns that have existing permits at this point. I believe the village of Pleasantville also has a permit. But the reality is, and I've made it very clear to them, and it becomes a condition of the permit, this is not a permit to start killing every coyote on the landscape. You can try, you probably won't be able to do it, and it's not going to solve the problem. So this is a permit to remove the animals that meet our criteria. So even though I issue to them what I consider a blanket permit, they know, and they're focusing their efforts on the area where that offending animal seems to be, where the dog was killed, where people are seeing it every day. So yeah, there's a couple towns, Mount Pleasant, Greenberg, Village of Pleasantville, that have had permits issued that can deal with those things.
Towns that have had humans bitten and then they get the permit.
Dogs.
Okay. Well, you said that.
In Rye in 2010, they had a permit that was issued because of that, but here's the reality. They didn't need a permit for that. Coyote bites a human. I would expect that the police are going to react. That's a human safety situation. You don't have to call me and wait for me to issue a permit. You don't have to justify to me.
Well, I'd rather be proactive and not
Sure.
wait until somebody gets bit.
You know, like I said, I don't think coyotes are a threat to people. That incident in 2010, I think that was an isolated incident. I hope it never happens again. It hasn't happened since. I really don't think that's going to become the situation. They're never going to look at us as part of a menu item. But, you know, what's proactive? Hazing, right? That's the best thing that we can do. You're going to start trying to kill them all. You're going to kill coyotes that aren't exhibiting that behavior. You're going to set up a situation where people think it's okay, and then you're just going to have other coyotes move into the area, it's not going to accomplish anything, trying to kill every coyote on the landscape. I think you had your hand up. Was it you? Okay. No, she's being generous.
I'm glad you said just what you said now about not killing every coyote, because I'm a little disturbed. This meeting seems to be a lot of anti-coyote sentiment, and what can we do to them or about them that
Sure.
just their mere existence is a problem. And I don't see that. I don't see it that just the fact that they exist is an issue.
Yeah, and I don't see that either.
I'm concerned that when you talk about coyotes that are threatening being removed, well, what's threatening? You know, some people might say, she's threatening to me. She's
Sure.
not far away. Somebody else might say she is, and she's way over there.
That's what makes my job difficult.
And somebody else isn't threatened, till,
That's probably the
So,
most difficult part
there are
about my
people
job when it
that
comes to
hysterical
issuing a
that, oh my
permit.
God, I'm threatened, it walked by me, it looked at me.
And I approach this with a high degree of scrutiny because, like I said, people often, like I said, that curious behavior, they interpret that as a threat. And we get a lot of those reports. Coyote sat there, I yelled, it didn't go away. I felt threatened. I don't see that as a threat. I see that as a coyote that's trying to assess the situation. What's going on here? Is this thing a threat? If it's not, I'm going to go about my day. So unfortunately, I'm the one that has to sit there and go through those reports and talk to those people and make that decision whether a permit should be issued or whether a permit should not be issued. And it's a really difficult decision to make, and there's always going to be people that are unhappy with that decision. There's going to be people that are unhappy when I don't issue the permit, and there's going to be people that are unhappy when I do issue the permit. And there are more instances where I do not issue permits than when I do. I looked it up last year. We issued 5 permits to take coyotes in 7 counties. And we probably get 100 calls a year.
What happens if you're walking a little dog and you gave some suggestions about how to make sure it's safe? Can you just pick up the dog and, walk into a house?
Here's the problem with that. When the coyote gets fixated on the dog, I've had a couple of reports, and this is what happened in Pleasantville. The coyote came after the dog that was on leash, the woman picked it up, and then I think the woman got scratched. So basically, she put herself between the coyote and the dog. And, it wasn't anything where she was harmed. She didn't end up in the hospital. It wasn't an attack. But she put herself in the way of that small dog, and there was an incident between a coyote and a human. That's a difficult question to answer. Getting in a house, sure. I think the best thing that we can do is get that coyote's attention on us and make it feel threatened somehow. Throw something at it, hit it with a stick, throw a stick at it, do something like that. Because, and you hear biologists say this all the time, and people are probably getting tired of hearing it. When you turn and you run, you're kind of creating that predator response about a prey item. So when you turn and run, you're acting like a prey item. So I try to tell people to hold their ground. And, at one point, I thought about putting out a pamphlet that said, hey, if you're attacked, fight back. But I didn't want to generate fear of coyotes because it wasn't something that we were seeing regularly. But the reality is, if something like that happens, fight back.
Okay, and I want to make a comment that sort of, to what you were saying. I'm here because I'm looking for ways. I have two young kids. I have a dog, and we had a coyote 2.5, 3 weeks ago, run right through our backyard. And the only thing I could think of was not telling anyone because I was fearful that the coyote would be hurt. That coyote, frankly, was not, it saw us, saw my children, saw my dog, went right past us, fearful of us, and didn't bother us. I am looking for ways to coexist. I don't want to throw rocks at a coyote.
Yeah.
And I really don't. I don't
Sure,
want to hurt
I get
them.
it.
I'm an environmental lawyer. I care about conservation
Sure.
of animals. But I'm, I understand people have fears if they have, so I have an 85-pound lab, okay, I get it, it's not a small dog. Nevertheless, I'm gonna holler before I let her out in the backyard, to what you said. But I think there has to be, well, maybe there doesn't have to
We
be,
hope.
but I'd like to believe, as you say, that they're not all looking to, they're looking to eat, they're looking
Right.
to survive. If there is a way of detecting, let's say, a rabid coyote from a non-rabid one, that would be, if you could speak a little bit about what a rabid coyote might be doing, that I think might be helpful so that we can maybe see that there are coyotes that may harm us versus those that really won't harm us.
So here's the reality with interpreting rabies versus a healthy animal, is it's very difficult to differentiate an animal that's rabid versus an animal that's not rabid until it gets to the point where it's aggressive. So like I said earlier, that aggressive behavior where it just starts running after, chasing everything, trying to bite anything that moves, that's our best way to interpret whether an animal that's on the landscape that is alive has rabies. You know, back in the day, it used to be, well, if you see this animal out during the middle of the day, but that's not the case anymore. Coyotes are out in the middle of the day all the time in Westchester. They're not rabid animals. You know, there's always that, well, you know, the rabid animals are drooling. Well, every report that I get of a coyote is drooling. Every report I get of a coyote, this animal was drooling and growling. And every report I get, I mean, almost every one, and I'm not exaggerating, almost every report I get is this animal's rabid. But 99.9% of the time, they're not. So it's very difficult to discern that behavior from a healthy animal until it gets to the point where it gets so aggressive that it just starts biting everything. It chases people on bicycles. The one in Hastings this year was chasing bicyclists. That's a clear indicator right there. They don't appear emaciated. Rabies hits an animal so quickly that it never gets a chance to appear emaciated. It's a perfectly healthy animal one day, and then the next day it's rabid and it's biting people. So you can't look at it, well, it looked sick, or it looked emaciated, it looked unhealthy, it's losing hair. Well, we know coyotes get mange in Westchester, so do foxes. You know, and that's not a good situation for that animal, but it's not a case of rabies. So that, you know, it's a difficult question for me to address other than that super aggressive behavior. If it starts approaching people though, there is probably some threshold there where that behavior starts to change, where it's not super aggressive yet, but it's doing things like approaching people, that loss of fear. That's the other thing that you hear. But coyotes and coyotes in Westchester seem to have very little fear of people anyway. But there's a difference between fear when I wave my arms at a coyote that's 30 yards away, and when I, you know, yell at a coyote or make a movement towards a coyote that's 5 feet away. And that thing is just standing there, and, you know, maybe it is salivating, maybe it is foaming, you know? But there is a clear difference in that behavior versus an animal that's outside that comfort zone and is just waiting to see what I'm gonna do next. So that, I think there's a period where they'll start approaching people where that fear is gone, and maybe they're not super aggressive yet. Those are ones that we want to hear about. Those are ones that I want you to be aggressive towards, but there are also ones that kind of trigger something in my mind that say, you know what, maybe this is a coyote that's going to need to be removed from the population. Unfortunately, I know you don't want to hear that.
Which is the one that was in your backyard versus.
It's called the best scientific guess.
Yeah, but when you're taking a walk, you can't stand there, is it gonna jump on me?
I know.
You can't make
Twice
the best
as fast.
I know.
scientific guess.
I know.
This past month, I had 2 different coyotes basically following me around the neighborhood.
Yeah, they are super curious.
But when there's 2 of them.
Split up and they turned into like a hunting behavior almost. You know what I mean? And
Yeah, like I said, I don't think they're hunting people.
Right.
It's,
We had a 10 dog.
And I'm,
Oh,
I
yeah,
was
yeah.
talking to a neighbor who also said that they have a den, I think, almost in their backyard. Right over
Sure.
by the emergency services
Sure.
On Weaver, they saw like 15, 20 of them over there.
so that's a whole other thing when you have a den site that's close to a home.
Yeah.
Here's the great thing about coyotes, but here's the unfortunate thing for Westchester residents. Coyotes maintain multiple den sites. They move their pups. Every denning season, they'll move their pups from den to den for a number of reasons. To avoid predators, to reduce parasite loads, to reduce scent probably to some degree. You know, another predator avoidance mechanism. But they have multiple den sites and they'll move those pups from den to den. The problem is, coyotes in Westchester, excuse me, have small home ranges, and if they move their pups from one den to another den, that other den is probably going to be close to somebody else's home. So now you've just moved them out of one den site that's near your home, and you move them to another den site that's probably close to somebody else's home. And it's those denning animals, those family units, where that male often is a threat to dogs.
But what kind of den? Are you talking like brush?
Often a hole in the ground. Sometimes it can be a hollowed stump, a log, a hollowed log. I have photographs of coyote pups inside a hollow tree. Most often it's a den that they've excavated that was started by a woodchuck or something else. They'll make it larger. Maybe it was a fox den originally, and they'll just further excavate it, and they'll have their pups in that hole in the ground essentially.
I'm just gonna suggest for those people that are afraid, and with good reason, because even this gentleman said that one coyote was in front of him, another one was sort of like, you know, surrounding him, is, if possible, walk in a group. Have a couple of people together.
You mean people? Oh,
Two
yeah, well, that's
people,
possible, sure.
2 dogs. The more you have, the less the chance they're gonna even think about you.
Yeah.
I've had instances, I live right on the sheldrake, I see coyote all the time. I admit I have a 75-pound lab, they're not bothering her.
Right.
In essence, they come right by me, I throw a stick, they leave. They
Right.
come right by me, I yell, they leave.
Right.
It was never anything where I ever felt fear. I felt fear, but I didn't feel like I had to start backing out.
Right.
And usually they respond, but the more the merrier.
That's not always feasible. It's a great idea, but it's not always feasible. But we have
I
a
get the
3-year-old
whole-
and we have a 10-pound dog who thinks when he sees a coyote.
What kind of
that-
dog is it, just out of curiosity?
Havanese.
Okay.
And has no fear of this coyote, so he's barking his head off.
It's like a Jack Russell kind of, king of the world.
Right. And, you know, there have been instances, thank God not lately, where someone would open the door and our dog would scoot out.
Right.
And that's terrifying.
Right.
Because obviously in this climate. But, you know, also there are times that my son wants to help with, you know, walking the dog.
Sure.
And I don't know if a coyote's seeing, yes, he's a human, but he's a little kid.
Right.
That's gonna deter the coyote. And again, with numbers, with 2 coyotes, I'm just wondering if throwing sticks or rocks or whatever it may be, and I don't wanna harm an animal too, but my first priority is my family, my dog.
Yeah,
and,
no, I think you have to
know.
defend your family. I think you have to defend your dog. I think that.
But I'm terrified. I won't even walk to the train station now.
Well, I mean, it used to be
It's
that.
changed my life.
Yeah, the whole thing about walking with other people outside is fine, and I get the whole coexistence thing, but it used to be that I'd walk my dog at night, and when I'm with neighbors, we chit chat, it's part of the fabric of the neighborhood. Now when I go out at night, it's like Omega Man, you know, I have like a whistle and a white light. And
I'm gonna be honest, I'm glad you do that. I think you're doing the right thing there.
Well, I have no other choice.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you have no other choice.
It just sucks to be terrified in your
Changes the whole
own.
Yeah.
fabric of the neighborhood.
I mean, I
Walking Dead or something.
Yeah, I don't think we should be living terrified of these animals. I think we should be living vigilant with these animals.
Is a whistle sufficient?
I think a whistle is sufficient to get that coyote's attention off your dog and on you. I don't think it's gonna make that coyote run away in cases where it's fixated on that dog. I think in some cases, I've had a lot of reports where they wave, they yell, they blow a whistle, they blow an air horn, and that coyote does run away. But there's situations where I get called and that coyote doesn't run away. And it just sits and it watches and it's trying to make that decision.
Oh, I blew the whistle.
You know, is this thing a threat or is it not?
They started coming closer after I blew the whistle. They backed off for about 1 minute and then they kept coming.
Yeah, I wish I had the silver bullet. I wish I could stand here and tell you guys, hey, I got the answer.
No, it is. I mean,
Yeah.
if you know where they are, and we've got the criteria of taking a dog.
Yeah,
Is there
and that's a
something
case
you know?
where I would talk to the municipality or I would talk to the homeowner. You know, in this case, and with the person in New Rochelle, is that
Yes.
where we decided?
It was Rochelle.
You know, we haven't received a report. I don't know who this person is. They didn't call the police. They didn't call us. I can't issue a permit when I don't get a chance to fill out an incident report and talk to a person. Now, if the community was convinced that this was a real incident, and they said, hey, we want a permit to address this, okay, let's address it. And I would get that done that day, and then it would be however long it took for them to find somebody to accomplish the task. Quite often when they hire somebody, they're not setting traps immediately. They might put cameras out first, they might try to figure out where the active, you know, routes are, you know, the areas that this animal's using. They might try to get an idea, you know, sometimes they try to get a visual of it because you get a description of the animal, the coloration. Their coloration can vary and sometimes you can tell from that whether it's the animal, the offending animal or not. the coloration, the one up in New Paltz recently that killed the dog, it looks a lot like a husky. It's white and gray and black, you know, but a lot of them kind of have that German Shepherd coloration, brown, red, gray. Some of them are jet black, some of them are blonde, some of them are red. So sometimes they can be identified, and there are ways. So they might not set traps right away. They might put out cameras and try to figure it out, but at some point they're gonna, my hope is that they make an effort to remove that animal. Because like I said, that's DEC's recommendation at that point.
I
Aren't
get
the
it for
traps,
whack-a-mole, but, you know.
are the traps capable of trapping other kinds of animals?
Hold that thought. He's had a question for a little bit, and then I'm going
Sorry.
to talk about that for kind of a prolonged period because there's something that I want to say. I don't know if I can really advocate for it, although I'm going to a little bit, and it's going to be here on TV, so everybody will know I did it. But
Okay, so I'm a little concerned. I mean, there are a lot of people in the community who have small kids or dogs, and their mindset about letting them out and walking their dogs has changed.
sure, we see that sentiment here tonight.
Okay, I don't think this is an individual problem that individual homeowners should have to face. I think the municipality should take some steps to determine, number one, what is the population of the coyotes in this town?
Unfortunately, I don't think you'll ever figure that out. But, you know, maybe through descriptors, maybe through, if you set up a Facebook page and people. So here's the problem, because this is what they tried to do in Chappaqua, where they had a lot of incidents. Chappaqua every year, I don't know why, but Chappaqua, just about every year I get a report of a dog being killed by coyotes. USDA went out a couple years ago and they set traps for coyotes. And, you know, Ken Pruce, the biologist there, and we talked about it. And we concluded that it was probably, you know, this one male in a family unit that was killing dogs, and he went out and he set traps, and they killed 7 in a week. So there was far more there than we thought were there.
But he just mentioned there were 20 in one place.
Sure, that would be, in my mind, that would be unusual. They don't exhibit pack behavior like wolves do. They're family units, which is usually the adults, sometimes a couple juvenile females that we feel may help out with the family unit, and then their offspring from that year. You know, to the best of my scientific knowledge, they're not pack-oriented, they're not in huge groups, but we know that there's family units on the landscape. Whether it's a case of that's a couple of family units that got together, maybe. It would be tough for me to say.
But it's a situation, apparently, I think you said that the generations are only 2 years, right?
Right.
So you're gonna have a population of unknown quantity multiplying every 2 years.
Sure.
The individual homeowners who see them don't know immediately whether they're rabid or not rabid.
Sure.
And now when you go out and walk your dog, especially at night, you know, you have to guard up, you know, with weapons and so forth. So the mindset of living in the community has changed.
Thank goodness.
Within the last few months.
Good.
As
And I know you're saying that, like it's not a good thing, but in my mind that is a good thing. Because like I said, they're here and they're here to stay, so I think your mindset has to change.
Well,
Well, I think there's just gotta be a way to decrease. the
yeah,
number.
that's exactly what I'm
That's,
saying.
you know,
There needs
That there's gotta be a way to
right,
what?
To decrease our population. Because
Birth control?
statistically,
Put a lid
the
on
more
it.
they increase, there's gonna be more and more.
Well, here's the good thing about coyotes. Their energetic demand, their nutritional requirements, their social behavior, their territoriality, they're kind of self-limiting to a degree. It's not like deer where you see their populations grow, not exponentially because nothing except bacteria grows exponentially. Everything has a carrying capacity. But, you know, there are limits based on their territoriality, there's limits based on their social units, there's limits based on their productivity, who breeds in that population, there's limits based on nutritional demands for that family unit. So, you know, in my opinion, populations in Westchester are probably stable. I don't think they're increasing annually. I think we're at the point now where the landscape is saturated. You know, I think populations are probably higher now than they were 10 years ago, but I don't think that's a fact of higher densities per square mile. My opinion is that's just a fact of more areas being colonized that were previously uncolonized.
I think it's important.
And I know that's not what people want to hear, you know, who cares if populations are stable? Sure, there is a way to reduce populations. You can remove them from the population. But again, what do you do in Westchester? You pay somebody, here's the thing. Not every coyote exhibits that behavior, so do you really want to just kill them indiscriminately because of fear?
I'm saying there needs to be a coordinated municipal approach to this, and I would like
Yeah,
I'd like to find out what happened in Greenberg, what happened in Rye, what happened in Pleasantville, what progress was made.
I mean, it's not good, I can't even take a walk anymore.
What about fencing the house?
Fencing is a good idea.
That they
If you have a
can't
small
jump
dog in a
on?
backyard, I think a fence is one of the best solutions.
How high does it have to be for a coyote to jump over?
I would say probably 6 foot. You know, that's another thing is you have local ordinances that prohibit these types of things. That's something that you can take up with the community. That's not something that I can change here. The only thing that I have an effect on is when the community can take action and what individuals in that population they can take action against. However, I will let you know that when I issue a permit, it's not limited in the number. Like I said in Chappaqua, when USDA was involved, they set traps and they trapped 7 animals. They thought they got every coyote out of the area, and guess what? The next year another dog was killed. So here's the thing, you can kill indiscriminately, they get the permit, they take coyotes, but that doesn't solve the problem.
I don't hear a solution.
I'm not sure there is a solution. I think modifying our behavior is a step in the right direction. I think being more protective of our small dogs in the backyards and the way we walk them is a step in the right direction. But I don't think you're ever going to eliminate the possibility that a coyote's going to kill a dog. Because there's always going to be coyotes and there's always going to be somebody that doesn't follow the rules. They're going to leave dogs outside unattended, they're going to walk them without leashes, and every now and then a dog is going to get killed. You can trap every coyote in that community, and next year it's likely that you're going to have another coyote that's going to come in and people are going to be complacent and a dog might get killed. I can't sit here, and I wish I could, I'd be lying to you though, sitting here telling you that, hey, I'll just give a permit and you kill them all and the problem's going to go away. I don't think that's the right answer, and I don't think it's a realistic answer.
I noticed that there's a lot of focus on dogs. I don't have a dog, but I have a 3-year-old who weighs 25 pounds.
Sure.
And I have a 6-month-old.
Yeah, I'd be super vigilant.
Yeah, and over the last 6 months, I've seen coyotes about 8 times in my backyard.
Sure.
And in my front yard. I yelled and made noise, they didn't respond.
Yeah.
It's just,
Sure.
he actually sat down and just stared
And
at me
look,
like you said. He was
exactly what I
curious
said.
and wanted to know what was going on, and
Yeah.
I had a conversation with my neighbor, and there was no fear. It was my daughter who actually said to the babies, "Oh, that's a coyote," you know, because I have been pointing it out to her for fear that maybe one day she might be attacked. I do agree with the gentleman who said that maybe the community should at least start to get an idea of the population, or if there's a situation where there's a known hotspot, maybe investigate that particular area. So if I hear 20 coyotes in one area, I may want to look into that a little further if I was part of the municipality.
Sure. You know, and I'm happy to work with the municipality. I'm not going to stand in the way of the municipality trying to address a coyote issue or perceived problem.
Because the next
You know,
step is-
I can't tell the municipality, hey, this is what you need to do. DEC has no authority to do that. But I can say, hey, I'm more than happy to work with you guys.
Yeah, so I don't know where that particular hotspot is, and I can't leash my 3-year-old, but she's gonna want to play in the leaves, she's gonna want to run off,
Yeah.
and I want her to have that life where she's not gonna be, you know, by my side in my front lawn.
Right.
But I don't know if that gentleman's my neighbor, and
Right.
so now I'm a little bit curious.
And that kind of speaks to what I talked about earlier. It's hard to get the entire community on the same page. Look around, how many people are in this room?
Absolutely, not a lot.
You've had your hand up for a while.
We have a 12-pound Bichon.
Yep,
and
I worry
he
about that
was-
one.
He was attacked 2 weeks ago
Yep.
at night, and we have let him out, and we have a fence.
Do you mind if we contact you and get an incident report about that? Just to interrupt you for one quick second?
No.
Okay, let me get your information when we're done here.
Thank God he's okay. He got a bit from behind, and he was hospitalized,
Mhm.
but we feel very grateful that he was either smarter or faster than the coyote, and we didn't see, like the vet said, do you know for sure it was a coyote? And we didn't see the
Right.
coyote. My husband ran and yelled, because we heard my dog screaming.
Right.
So we can't say for sure it was a coyote.
Right, but
But-
there's some level of certainty. It's not like a
Right.
cat where there's a
Right.
million things out there that kill
Right.
cats.
So now I'm afraid, I'd rather walk in the neighborhood than in my backyard. We have a fence, but we live on, the river. The river kind of dumps at the end of my street. So we have a lot of tall reeds. So I'm thinking maybe, they were hiding in the reeds. I don't know if they got through the fence. But, should, even in your backyard, the dog always be on a leash and someone always be with the dog?
I think if it's an unfenced backyard,
Well,
like I
it's
said, you know, a
fenced.
4-foot fence, coyote could probably get over. I think they really want to get in that backyard to make an effort to climb that fence. But I think if there's a small dog in their territory, I'm not going to rule out the possibility that they might get over that 4-foot fence. And I know not everybody's going to, you know, spend the money to put a fence. But if my backyard, if I was a Westchester resident, or no matter where I was in the state, if I owned a small dog and I had coyotes in the area, especially if I knew and I had seen them around and I knew that I was in one of their home ranges, I would not let my dog outside unattended.
We have a fence.
I still might want to supervise that dog.
Oh, yes, I am, but, I guess that.
And I shouldn't say might, I'd want to supervise that dog.
Yeah, yeah. Would a flashlight, does that, you know,
Let
nothing?
me give you an example about a flashlight. And this is really bizarre behavior. I came home, my wife and I pulled into our driveway one time. This is up in the Catskills, so it's much more rural. And our headlights shined on a gray fox. You know, it's a canid, it's similar to a coyote, it's smaller, but behaviors are similar, they're mousers too. And when I started to pull into the driveway and my headlights went from on that coyote to on the yard, he went everywhere my headlights went. It was almost as if my headlights were assisting him with doing his mousing. So obviously in that case, shining bright lights, and I had high beams on, was no distraction to that animal. If anything, that animal was benefiting from me doing that. It certainly did not chase that gray fox away.
Couldn't you use that light to steer him away from you?
Yeah, I would like to believe, I would love to say yes.
Or you need a flashlight to see the coyote.
Sure, yes.
So an air horn is a good thing?
I think an air horn's a good thing. Like I said, if you got a small dog, it's gonna take the attention off that dog and make him aware of your presence. And that loud noise, you know, most animals, humans probably have the worst hearing of any of the animals out there on the landscape. Canids have very good hearing. They're probably, and I've never done any studies on a canid's hearing versus a human's hearing, but I would like to believe that their hearing, that their ears are sensitive, and a loud noise like an air horn, especially close range, might disturb that animal enough to the point where it would make it go away. We've seen examples of it in New Paltz with those 2 juveniles that were going around wreaking havoc on the community. We sent one of our technicians out and she blew an air horn and it disturbed that animal enough where that animal went away. And so did a car horn. But Westchester is a different situation than New Paltz. It's not the same place.
So first a comment and then a question. I'm still a little bit concerned about the community kind of, if they ever heard somebody say, taking up arms against the coyotes.
Sure, I'm sure the police would be concerned about that too.
I think that's the wrong approach. And the idea that you create a vacuum because there are favorable conditions wherever animals are, cats, dogs, coyotes, whatever, horses. They're gonna come there because the conditions haven't changed. So even if you remove them, the conditions are the same. So you just make space for more dogs, cats, coyotes, whatever, to take that space. But I'm also concerned about the idea of having little toddlers running around and playing in our yard and having coyotes walk by. So I guess my question is, if you're in a situation where you're talking to your neighbor and you see a coyote in your yard, 10 feet away or something, 20 feet away, what happens if you do nothing? Like you just stand there and keep talking?
Complacency
The coyote just
by
continues to
humans
move on?
develops complacency by the coyote. And that coyote learns that humans are no threat at all. and tolerates humans to the point where they feel comfortable even in close distances to humans. In my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of biologists, is complacency is not the answer.
So the harassment
Yes.
idea?
Yes.
And where's the line between like harassment
And
abuse?
breaking the law
No, and abuse.
and abuse, yeah.
Where that
I would say
takes
abuse would be
far.
anything that causes harm to that animal. Now, you can say, well, what about killing it? That's causing harm. You know, and I get that argument, but the reality is you can legally kill a coyote in New York during an open season. It doesn't mean you can do inhumane things. You can't torture animals. New York Ag and Markets has laws to prevent animal cruelty, but our trapping seasons, our hunting seasons, we consider ethical and humane.
Yeah, no,
If
I
we
get
didn't,
that.
we wouldn't allow it. So what crosses that line?
I'm just talking for like.
That's a good
regular
question.
people.
I would say if you're causing harm, undue harm to that animal, and it's outside of an open season and you're doing it just because, I would say that draws that line. But I think if a coyote is approaching my small dog and you kicked it and harmed it, I would not say that you crossed that line. So everything is subjective. And that's why I said my job is so difficult, because my job is to interpret those situations and draw some conclusion. Was this behavior warranted? Is issuing a permit warranted? It's really difficult for me to make those decisions. It is. What crosses the line between humane and inhumane? It's really difficult to make that decision. It really is, because I'm sure there are people in this room that would say setting a trap for a coyote is inhumane. But the state of New York says, hey, if it's an open season or you have a permit outside of an open season, you may set that trap. Now, traps are regulated as well. There is what we consider a more humane set than a less humane set. You know, for instance, when somebody is doing nuisance beaver work, we don't let them, so we have this new tool, and I wanted to talk about this because you brought up traps. We have this new tool for trapping nuisance beavers called a cable restraint, but you may not set it in a way that causes that beaver to drown. It is a live set, and it must be set in a way that that animal stays alive while it is in that trap. So you can't set it as a drowned set. So we would consider that an inhumane approach, even if the goal is to kill that beaver.
I understand, and just so everybody knows, I'm not saying I'm against removing certain coyotes
Sure.
or harassing them. I just
Sure.
want to make sure there's a clear line between
Sure.
harassing them.
It's a fuzzy line,
Okay.
but hopefully it's going to get more clear as we get more information, as I learn throughout my career. I still have another 12 years before I retire. It's a long time to try to learn. So she had her hand up.
I just want, you mentioned, the hunting season starts October 1st.
Yes.
When does it end? When are you no longer permitted? to
February
hunt?
14th.
I thought it was 15th. 14th? I thought it was February 15th. God, you know, I get so nervous when I get asked these questions. It's mid-February.
So mid-February.
And trapping ends late March.
There's no more legal killing or permits issued to.
Oh, we can issue permits to take outside of an open season anytime.
Okay.
We typically wouldn't during an open season because we would say, what's the need?
Right.
Why do I have to issue a permit to trap this animal when you can trap as long as you have a license? So if during an open season, so here's the difference. During an open season, you must be a licensed trapper or hunter, which means in New York State, you took a course that teaches basically trapper education or hunter education, and then you purchase that privilege to do so. Outside of an open season, the permit that I issue, I can issue you that permit even if you're not a licensed trapper. Here's the caveat. Anybody who sets traps is considered an agent, and they have to be trained. Not necessarily licensed, but they have to be trained in the use of the traps. They still have to mark their traps. They have to follow New York State law with regard to setting traps. Traps have to be marked with their ID, some sort of identification.
Oh, I've heard, we have this neighborhood network, people have been, there's been such anxiety and so many comments made, people for the coyotes, people.
Yeah,
for
sure.
And it's gotten very heated to the
Sure.
point that somebody was threatening to run around with a gun and shoot
Sure.
a coyote and.
Oh yeah, and I've seen that at my meetings.
That's frankly
My
more
meeting in
frightening than the
Yonkers,
coyotes.
the meeting that I did in Yonkers, that's about how it went. That's about how it went. I had people screaming at me in that meeting. I had people on both sides yelling at me at that meeting. That's how I know I'm doing my job right, when everybody hates me.
Could you please, well, this lady had her
Yeah.
hand up for a while, but I also really would like you just
Address
to
the
plainly
traps.
address the danger of the traps.
Yeah, okay.
I just had a quick question. You had said that we're not likely to see huge continued growth because at a
Correct.
certain point, because they're territorial,
Gets
the
saturated.
area gets saturated.
Yep.
Has anyone, and I'm sure they have, so I know I'm not introducing something new, but we have this problem with goose, geese, and swans, the rock and roll.
Yep.
Birth control. So therefore, those animals that are saturating the area aren't reproducing, but they're still maintaining the territory and the saturation point.
Okay, so here's the problems with birth control. A, it's not approved for use with coyotes. Birth control, those types of things need FDA approval. It's administering a drug to wildlife, and that is not approved. B, you have an open population, so even if you control reproduction to the point where mortality takes over and the population starts to decline, you're going to have new individuals that come in from the surrounding areas that occupy those areas. The only place we've seen immunocontraception or birth control be any success at all with deer populations, I think, is in Fire Island, which is a closed deer population essentially. Although they got there somehow, so they can probably get there, but you know, it's limited because it's an island. Open populations, you're not likely to have success. Here's the third problem with using birth control in the landscape. You haven't got rid of the animals that are there. If you think that animal is a threat to the safety of you or your pet, what's the point of giving it birth control?
I think you had said, and there's another part I was thinking, you said any canid could be trained. And I was thinking that there is the possibility, as you said, hazing can work. There's behaviors that with that population, since new ones aren't coming to replace, you create some sort of training thing, which I mean, obviously in this meeting you can't do, but I think people have mentioned a community approach. And since there's many communities in New York State, it'd be interesting to see if different communities come up with different approach, measure success rates, and see if there is something we can do, rather than just throw up our hands and say probably not.
Sure. And let me go on to address the birth control thing. So there's 5 key issues. I've named 3. 4, it's extremely expensive. 5, you'd have to administer it to every female, and it usually takes 2 doses. So in reality, good luck achieving that.
And do they
You're not
tag?
likely
Do you
to.
ever tag them and follow? And I think.
In New York, no, we do not.
I'm not really scared myself, but I am listening to a lot of the
Right,
concerns.
and there's fear here.
And if you definitely, and if you have a small child and they get attacked, that changes your life forever.
Sure.
And same thing with your dog. Dogs are like people's babies, you know, to some extent, you know.
Sure. Yeah, they're
And
family members.
They are.
Yeah.
And so I'm just thinking that we should maybe encourage looking at this in new ways.
Yeah.
Especially the fact that you said canids can be trained.
Right, there's going to be some new approach. It's probably going to be something different in 10 years than there is now. At least I'd like to believe. I don't know if that's the case, but I'd like to believe that community-wide there will be a new approach. I'm not sure birth control is going to be that approach, but I think, and one of the things that I've talked about, and I'll reach out to the town of Mamaroneck, is, you know, I'm creating, for lack of a better term, a coyote task force, which is going to get members of these different communities to meet as a group, and it would probably be once a year. I don't think they're going to have any interest in meeting more than once a year. We can easily communicate by email and on the phone, but I think once a year would be nice to get a community leader together with myself, and it would probably be up at DEC in New Paltz, because there'd be communities all over the region, not just in Westchester County, and just talk about it and kind of look at these different approaches. So that's something that I've already discussed with a couple of communities. We haven't been able to put anything together so far, but that's just because of limitations and time constraints and things like that. But over time, you're going to see that happen, and those discussions occur not just community-wide, but landscape-wide across our region.
You said a couple of things, and so I'm thinking, one, which I don't want you to address yet, but you just sort of said, kick it, and I'm thinking, I don't want that coyote that close that I didn't kick it.
Sure,
But
nobody
that's
does.
one thing. The other thing is that, can the municipalities that are here, and I know they're all represented here, can they help in some way of reaching out to the community, mapping where there is some concentration, bigger concentration of these
Newcastle did that
animals? Yeah.
very thing.
And you've given some guidelines that, quite frankly, don't necessarily match what we were handed here to read. So that some of this advice that you're saying could actually be sent out, put on the website, sent out in newsletters, so that the community in greater number know about this, and that there be some concerted effort, maybe your task force would help, but in this area, so that people know, for example, an air horn might help as you walk your dog, or a whistle, or something like that, so that there's some level of more of comfort. I have a 30-pound dog, and I'm a little nervous walking the dog at 11 o'clock at night up and down my street. The other thing is, can the municipalities change their laws so that there is something that is, if they choose to spend the money and fence in their backyard, it's not 100%, I guess, but more of a coyote-proof kind of fence. Right now, we're not permitted to do that.
Sure. I mean, those are things that communities can certainly address. Ordinances can be changed. New York State changes laws all the time. I don't want to speak for the community, but may I speak for the community for a second? I would say sure. Ordinances can be changed. We've seen discharge ordinances in communities be changed to the point where communities in Westchester that never allowed discharge of bows allowed discharge.
What do you mean by discharge? Bow and arrow.
Shooting a bow. And I'm trying to think of the community right now. Pound Ridge actually opened a deer hunting program within not the town of Pound Ridge, but the village of Pound Ridge. So, and I've seen it on the other side of the river as well. So yeah, communities absolutely have the ability to change ordinances and address things like that if it reaches that level of concern where they think that needs to be done.
When you talk about dispersal, like this gentleman was saying with the children, that there were so many of them around his area. I've studied wildlife, and my understanding when you talk about dispersal is one pair of the coyotes, they're not having animals after animals after animals that are all staying in the area. When you say disperse, they have to disperse and go find their own
Yes.
territories.
Right, that's what prevents
So
inbreeding.
they're not 20 and 30 after, 10 years, there's 20 and 30
Correct.
coyotes
So-
in the same family there.
Usually it's the males that disperse the longer distances, but females will also disperse. Sometimes there's some fidelity to their, the home range that they were raised in, but both individuals, males and females, will disperse. But like I said, males usually disperse a little further. And that's basically a way of protecting against inbreeding within a population. So, males go off, find new territory, breed with women that are not related, or breed with females. Sorry, I'm sorry. But now let me address the traps real quick.
And I
So-
just want to ask people, if you have not signed in, please sign in so that we have a record of who is here and we can communicate with you about the issue. Thanks.
So with regards to traps, traps have gotten a bad rap. People think of these antiquated traps, they think of these tooth steel traps, they think of traps that are going to harm non-selectively. But the reality is, the way these people set traps on the landscape, they're padded traps, they're foothold traps. And they're called foothold traps because the very thing that they do is they hold an animal by the foot. In New York State, there's a regulation, they have to check that trap every 24 hours. I don't hear reports like you always hear people saying, well, the animals chew their feet off. I don't hear those reports from trappers. I talk to a lot of trappers. I know a lot of guys that trap. And you don't hear of things like that happening. These are padded foothold traps that are designed to hold an animal in place. They're not selective, but the reality is if they get an animal that's a non-targeted animal, it can be released unharmed. They set traps that are usually, for that specific species that they're trapping. So a foothold for a raccoon is going to be different than a foothold for a coyote. Would a foothold set for a coyote injure a cat? I'm not going to say that it won't. Sure, it could injure a cat. Yeah, it could injure a dog, but probably not. The fact that they're padded, they're going to hold tight and it's going to hurt. But I don't think they're going to come away maimed or permanently injured from that. And here's the other thing, I'm sorry, and then I'll take your question. The thing that I'm gonna kind of advocate for is, I mentioned with trapping beavers is cable restraint. A lot of people think of this cable restraint as something that suspends an animal like a snare. They think of snares back in the day, they were set on these poles, and when an animal gets caught, it suspends that animal in the air, it chokes that animal out. Well, cable restraints, modern cable restraints, and the way they use them for beaver and the way that other states, the way trappers use them for coyotes, is they are set, they may not be set to suspend an animal. So what they do is they're just set to hold that animal in place. And it's with what we call a relaxing lock. So if that animal struggles, it gets tighter. If that animal relaxes, it'll relax a little bit. It's not gonna choke the animal out, it's not a kill trap. And what I've been told by people that trap coyotes with them in other states where they're legal is when a dog gets caught in a cable restraint, it's like a dog on a leash, and it sits down. And then you can release that dog unharmed. So it's not selective, but it's not gonna kill that animal, it's not gonna harm the non-target animals. It's a tool that we think is super beneficial on the landscape, especially here in Westchester for use with coyotes. The problem is, the way the law is written now, cable restraints may only be used in New York to trap nuisance beaver, no other species. And it can only be done if that trapper is certified by a DEC biologist, and they have to have a permit to do so. We would love to see trappers have the ability to use cable restraints for trapping nuisance coyotes and go through that same certification process. The problem is we put that law on paper and that law sits there, you know, connected to some other law and some bill, and it sits there on somebody's desk, and I don't really know politics that well, but it never goes through. So we kind of advocate for it with these municipalities. We say, hey, if you have any ability to kind of advocate for this, with, you know, through legislation, this is something that DEC would love to see. The use of cable restraints to trap nuisance coyotes by certified trappers.
Do you have any examples of surveys that municipalities can use to give out to their community? Have you seen a coyote in your area?
I would reach out to Newcastle. To Newcastle, town of Newcastle. They are the ones that have done this. They are the ones that have set up through, I believe it was Facebook, some sort of social media connection with the public that allowed them to collect data, so to speak, about the coyote populations in their community. Here's the problem with that methodology. They gave the community the ability to basically put a pin on a map anywhere it saw a coyote. And then a week later, it looks like you have 1,000 coyotes in your community because there's 1,000 pins on that map. But it could be 1, 2, 5, 10 coyotes that are just being seen repeatedly. So you have to be careful when you set something like that up with how you interpret the information that you collect from the public. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, I think it's a great idea. I'm just saying be careful how you interpret that information to the community leaders that are here. But yes, I would reach out to Newcastle. If I was a community leader and I was interested in doing something like that, I would reach out to Newcastle. If they wanted me to be the liaison, I would certainly do that.
Hope we're exhausted.
Well, one more. Can she just ask one more? Or?
Oh, yeah, you have another
Did I
question?
understand you were saying about the leg, the foothold trap?
Mm-hmm.
That the animal can be trapped like that for 24 hours?
Correct.
Before it's released?
Correct.
Whether it's a dog or a coyote?
Correct.
That seems inhumane to me. I mean, killing, that seems horrible.
Yeah.
That you're gonna,
You could argue that. I mean, we could argue that it's being held in place unharmed and it's going to be released at that period, you know, at the end of that period.
but if it's, it
So-
may be unharmed physically, or you're also making it a sitting duck to be attacked by something else.
So here's the beauty of
But
it.
the dog is gonna be attacked by the coyote because it's
Sure.
trapped in one
Here's the
place.
beauty of it though, when you're acting on a permit that's issued by me, I can put a condition on that permit that's different than New York State regulations. So if the community said, hey, we want to make it so they have to check their trap every 6 hours, I can say, okay. Or the community can say, hey, if we're gonna hire you to do this, you have to check the trap every 6 hours. Some traps, they can set them up with remote cameras so they can check them from their phone.
Can you require that? Can you just do that when you?
I think the community can require it. I don't think I'm gonna require that on a permit, because I think that can sometimes hinder progress. But I would let the community, if I were the community, I would certainly talk to the trapper about doing that if that was a concern of mine.
Is it true that coyotes have no predators?
Cars, people, wolves, where wolves live. Oh, two more.
Not a question, but a statement. I live right over here in the Hampshire golf courses behind us. There's a pack there, and it has been for maybe 4 years. So it's repopulated 6 bucks twice. We hear them howl when the sirens go by.
Oh, they love it.
Did you guys talk about this? Because I came in late.
They love it. No, we didn't talk about that. Dogs do that too.
Well, my
When I
dog
was-
will howl because they're howling.
Yeah, I've heard dogs. I had a girlfriend in high school. Every time the fire siren went off at 12 o'clock, that dog would howl. Yeah, coyotes do that. Here's a little bit of reassurance. When you hear coyotes howling, they're not killing something. The worst thing a predator can do is advertise when it has a kill. So when they're howling, that's social units communicating with each other. It's mom, dad, and the pup saying, hey, here we are. Mom's either saying, come back here. They're communicating in some way, but they're certainly not communicating to other coyotes in the area that we have something here that you have a chance to come scavenge off of.
We have heard them cackling when they.
Yo, they have a number of different calls. They have a whole variety of calls, and they all mean something different.
We thought they were killing something.
No, not typically. They are silent killers.
Kathy?
Nancy, you mentioned calling the police, so under what circumstances really should the public call the police?
You know, I'd call the police anytime I feel there's a threat. And that's subjective, sure, but it's not gonna hurt anything. I wouldn't call 911 unless it was an absolute emergency. 911 should only be used for emergencies. But if you saw somebody being attacked by a coyote, I'd call 911. But other than that, if you felt like there's a coyote exhibiting some kind of threatening behavior, call the police. And if you're wrong and it's not,
I would just say, I brought the New Rochelle list, about 25 sightings. Police responded each time, only once was the coyote still there.
yeah.
So the chances of the police responding unless it's aggressive and seeing the coyote are about zero.
Slim to none. Thanks, folks. Those of you that stuck around, thanks. I appreciate it.
I'm just gonna thank Kevin Clarke formally on behalf of the Town of Mamaroneck, Village of Larchmont, Village of Mamaroneck, for coming here this evening and educating us about coyotes and their behavior. We certainly heard a lot of suggestions tonight and a lot of possible programs to look into, a lot of ways to get more information by talking to some of our neighbor communities. And we will embark on that effort and see if we can get some more information that could be helpful to our residents. But as Kevin said, if you feel threatened, please call the police. And otherwise, I also think we should take to heart that Kevin said coyotes are not looking to attack people. That is not something that they normally do. Okay, thank you again, Kevin.